Margaret, it looks like the webinar is now streaming live on Facebook. So you're a magician.
I think we got it figured out. That's the first time I've been able to do it from my account. So we are good to go.
On Facebook. So
Yeah.
You're a magician.
I think we got it figured out. That was the first time I've been able to do it from my account.
Now we really know it's working.
All right, June, I'll let you go ahead and we can all get started. Thank you everyone for being here, and I will pass the microphone and the screen over to June.
Sorry, I'm getting it in the Q&A. Looks like the chat is disabled. Thanks, Kinsley.
All right, well, I'll get working on that, but we can get started. And yeah, thanks everyone for being here.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming, everyone. I'm June, and I am the energy coordinator at Susitna River Coalition. I live and work in Talkeetna, which is on the traditional and unceded lands of the Dena'ina. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, just let us know who you are and where you're chiming in from. And on the screen tonight, we have Margaret Stern, who is our outreach coordinator, and Matthew Perkins and Andrew McDonnell, who will be giving the presentation tonight. If you have any questions during their presentation, if you can use the Q&A and write in questions there instead of in the chat, that would be great. And in order to use it, you just go to the bottom of the screen. So we are the Susitna River Coalition. We are a small grassroots organization based in Talkeetna, Alaska, committed to supporting and protecting the Susitna River watershed. We originally formed in response to the proposal of the Susitna Dam. And since then, our focus has brought into education and outreach on various projects that have the capacity to alter our watershed and livelihoods in the upper Susitna Valley. And our speaker series is a big part of that mission. Margaret, do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for being here. This is the January installment, the first speaker series event of 2023. So we're really happy that you are all here to join us this evening. And first of all, before we really dive into the presentation, we are funded by, again, we're a small grassroots organization, and events like this are made possible by the Jessica Stevens Foundation, the Talkeetna Community Council, and the Chase Community Council, as well as every individual generous donor in our community that really helps support our work. So thank you to all of those entities and individuals. Really want to make sure that we thank them for making all of this possible. And I will pass it back to June to introduce our speakers for the evening.
Thanks, Margaret. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to talk a little bit about the MEA elections coming up. The Matanuska Electric Association, or MEA, is having a board election this spring. If you pay an MEA electric bill, you are a member owner of this utility co-op, and that gives you the ability to vote for the MEA board of directors and key bylaw changes. The MEA board makes important decisions about where our energy comes from, and there are going to be 2 at-large seats available this spring. And we need to vote in responsible leaders who will speak out against harmful projects like the Susitna Dam and find clean alternatives to large-scale hydro energy generation. If you're interested in finding out more about the elections and voting, or you want to be involved, you can email me, and I will put my email in the chat if it's working. It's just June@susitnarivercoalition.org. And we also encourage you to take a quick survey when you get a chance. I'll also put the link in the chat to be added to our MEA Elections and Clean Energy contact list, so you can be updated on energy events. What else? Also, they are looking for a candidate candidates right now to be on the MEA board. So if you're interested, the application is online on their website, on the MEA website, and I will also put that link in the chat. And now I'd like to introduce Matthew Perkins and Andrew McDonnell of Alaska Renewables. They're a small company based in Fairbanks and are working on some new renewable energy projects for the Railbelt region of Alaska. And they will be providing an overview of their work, and that includes the proposed Little Mount Susitna Wind project. So you guys can start your presentation whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks, June and Margaret and Melissa as well. Thank you very much for hosting us here on the webinar here for Susitna River Coalition, and it's great to see the faces and names there. And I hope that that people can check this out on the video afterwards as well. My name is Andrew McDonnell, as June mentioned, and I'm based up here in Fairbanks and on the lower Tanana River area of the Dene people. And I've been here for about 10 years. I moved to Alaska at that time to start work as a researcher and faculty at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And I've been involved in community groups and learning more about the energy scene over my decade or so or more now here in the interior. And that's really where this overall idea and our company evolved out of. And we're basically trying to respond to the needs of Alaska to bring low cost and reliable and environmentally responsible energy solutions to the front, so that the utilities can basically sign on to and bring onto their system. So it's a pleasure to be here. Matt, let me allow you to introduce yourself a little bit, and then we can give you a little bit more of an update on what we've been working on and the project down in Little Mount Susitna.
Yeah, well, this is Matt Perkins, and it's really nice to meet all of you. And I've been working with Andrew for the last couple of years to get this off the ground. So thanks again, June and Margaret, for hosting it. And I'm really looking forward to meeting all of you. I see a couple wonderful familiar names here. Folks who already know our project pretty well, so I'm kind of surprised they dialed in this on an evening to join, but that's nice and appreciated. But I'm looking forward to getting to know those of you who we don't yet know and hearing your ideas, your hopes, your concerns in tonight's conversation, and obviously at any point in the future. So thanks, Andrew. You're still on mute.
There we go. Can somebody confirm that you can hear me and see the slideshow now? Okay, great. Thanks. All right. Let me see here. So a little bit about our motivation. As an environmental scientist and originally ocean scientist, and working at the university and studying our changing oceans and the impacts it's having on the ecosystems there as a result of climate change and climate warming, and a lot of that heat going into the oceans, and changing the chemistry of the sea as well through ocean acidification. I studied and taught courses on these subjects for about 10 years, and this, you know, like, and realizing the scale of the problem that we are facing in terms of trying to address the climate problem and reduce our carbon emissions was really what drove me to get involved in more solution-oriented work. And so we were really listening to what the community's needs were. And you know, for years, the interior community has been asking for repeatedly, you know, showing up to board meetings at the Golden Valley Electric Association and asking for an expansion of their renewable and diversification of their energy supply to include more renewables. And by and large, there's a lot of support for that. And we were kind of looking at this and saying, well, you know, in the lower 48 and elsewhere in the world, we're watching really a real shift that's underway in energy systems, and sort of yearning for something similar here in Alaska, but not really seeing any major projects being deployed. The biggest renewable energy project in Alaska, like recently, has been the Fire Island and the Beaver Creek wind projects that were 17 and 24 megawatts each, and so relatively modest size. And they were built about 10 years ago now, and so there's been kind of a dearth of projects. We're starting to see some new solar projects come on, but really, like, we wanted to ask the question, what could we do to bring on new projects to address this, reduce our emissions, lower energy costs for Alaskans, and really cross that sort of economic barrier that we perceived was preventing the deployment of renewable energy at scale, and then make a shift that really anchors our own energy security and energy independence baseline here in Alaska. And if you look at, you know, in Fairbanks, for example, the conversation is built around is often around the topic of coal and how the utility recently decided to decommission the Healy 2 coal power plant, and so that retirement is coming up, and we need to fill in for that loss of energy production on the grid, and ideally that would be something that's renewably powered. And so and similarly in South Central Alaska, we're looking at the natural gas supply constraints and the rising costs of natural gas, and the sunsetting contracts for the utilities to purchase renewable natural gas from the Cook Inlet Basin as that field matures, and looking to make projects that can make a real difference in that. And then that's in context as well of the fact that we recognize and acknowledge that Alaska's economy has, for a long time now, really been built around the energy industry and the oil and gas industry specifically. And we're aiming to see if we can begin to develop projects, renewable projects, and bring them online in a way that can establish a new economy baseline for Alaska's future, and so that we don't have to be dependent so much on those non-renewable resources that we currently are. So that's kind of our motivation. And Matt and I both come from like families of conservation oriented families, and And so this is definitely, you know, like environment and place and the values of you know, natural landscapes and you know, and impacts of human activities on our environment are really at the top of our consideration here. And so we're just really thrilled to be able to meet with you all here and share a little bit about the projects that we've been working to develop, and also yeah, just hear feedback from you and further get the word out about this potential for energy transformation. So I wanted to ask June, can you queue up the poll here? All right, so you should see a poll come up on your screen, and the question is, what energy source would you like to see play the biggest role in Alaska's future energy supply? And so this is just a, you know, just for fun and to gauge the interest and response of the panelists. And since in some ways, since SRC got its start as you know, on the basis of an energy-based issue, which was the Susitna hydro project, you know, I figured it would be interesting to see this. So give you a moment to respond. And then I don't know, June, if you can close off the poll in a few seconds, and then we see the results, or we can talk about it afterwards. I don't know.
Andrew, you're cruel. You're making people pick only one, but of course, you know, it's not the way the world works.
But that's what I said, the biggest role in and so if, you know, like, yes, I definitely appreciate that it's going to take a mix here. So
yeah, so it looks like we have one person that answered coal, oil, and gas, 8 that answered wind, 1 that voted for large hydro, and 2 that voted for tidal.
All right, great. Yeah, well, that's great. We were asking ourselves the same sorts of questions that we just saw in this poll, and yeah, trying to determine what would be the best way to bring new renewable onto the grid. And that's where we really took a technology agnostic look at things, and really started narrowing down on the opportunity of wind power. And there are a variety of reasons why that makes sense, why it made sense for us, and why we think it makes sense for the broader Alaska, state of Alaska, to pursue wind power in an important part of the overall mix of our energy supply. And I guess part of that is the economics. This is a proven technology that's been around and matured for over the last decade, especially as the deployment scale of these projects has gone from a few hundred gigawatts to maybe 10 times that more recently. And so the industry has really learned how to do this well, how to lower costs, and then also do it in a responsible way, and find ways to mitigate the impacts, and identify, and yeah, the potential impacts that can result from energy project development in general. And so, just as an example, like the size of the Eva Creek wind turbines that are outside of Healy would be, you know, like they were big for their day. They're about a 2 megawatt machine, but the wind turbines today that are kind of the industry standard are more in the 3 to 4 megawatt power class, and they have much larger wind swept areas, And so in that manner, they're much more efficient at gathering the energy from the wind. And I apologize if you hear my kids scream. They just arrived in the background, so they're going to try to get my attention, and I'll try to stay focused here. So we've been working over the last couple of years to put together two primary projects that we're advancing through early and middle stage of development. And these are one project to the west of Fairbanks, the Shovel Creek Wind Project, and one project to the west of the Susitna River, Little Mount Susitna Wind. I'm sorry. Hey, let me pause for a second.
Yeah, and the projects have been, I'll chime in for Andrew while we're waiting. We've been in consultation with environmental groups and with members of the public related to these projects for about a year and a half so far. And at the same time, these are still in relatively early development because, you know, there's just a tremendous amount to learn. And every time we talk to someone, we learn something. Andrew,
yeah, I'm back. Thanks for.
You just wanted to test if I was paying attention.
my 3-year-old appeared in the doorway there, and he was all prepared to do some construction work in here with his safety glasses and hammer with him. So okay, so these two projects together, they have the potential to provide anywhere from 20 to 40% of Alaska's total electrical energy needs, depending on the project's the final project size. And this is how we would, we would have to figure out. We don't know exactly how big these projects will be in terms of the exact number of turbines, because that's all part of the design and optimization and environmental study, and also understanding what the market is for utilities to be able to purchase renewable energy from these projects as well. So so these have the potential to make a significant dent in the problem statements that we were setting out to address in the beginning. So if you think about, like, Cook Inlet is currently producing about 24 billion cubic feet of natural gas that gets burned and utilized for power generation. And so each one of these projects has about the capacity to offset about 4 billion cubic feet of natural gas. And so so they can have a significant impact on just the amount of energy, and we hope the ultimate cost of energy that people are paying here in Alaska and on our energy bills. So I wanted to quickly, or maybe Matt, do you want to go through the various stages of wind project development?
Just want to make sure I'm paying attention. Yeah, so absolutely, and I saw a couple of questions come in, which are great questions, and we'll get to some of them at the end, but I'll try to respond to some of them live as well, because we'd love to make this as conversational as possible. The only thing I'd add to what, and by the way, June, can you hear me okay? Since I haven't, cool. Only thing I'd add to what Andrew just said around the capacity that these projects could play in the future energy mix for the state. As many of you know, the production of natural gas in Cook Inlet, peaked a long time ago and has dramatically decreased over the past decade. And so part of the question back to the poll is what will we use in 2025 to power these lights, to power this furnace, to charge our electric vehicle if that's what you're driving. Any of those things, and there is a Andrew said the poll was for fun, and it is fun, but there is a real decision that needs to be made by the community about what's going to fill in for that. And it could be new gas, could be new drill rigs in the inlet or onshore, et cetera. And that's, I'll answer a question from someone logged in from there, Samsung. How would these wind towers get to Little Mount Susitna? Andrew will go over some maps in a little more detail, but the most likely approach, and we've studied many different approaches, would be to go by barge to Beluga and then go through the existing gas field roads up towards the mountain, and then with new roads approach the plateau. This utilizes the most existing infrastructure. It requires the least new road, and all of the impacts that a road has. And it also serves, existing players. For example, there's currently a power plant in Beluga that's being it's been retired by Chugach Electric, and so in some ways it fills in for that. So that's the approach that makes the most environmental sense fundamentally. And we're continuing to look at all sorts of options related to that, so we don't have a completely final answer. Yeah, talk a little bit about the wind project development process. Boy, I wish it was as simple as these bullets here. Boy, yeah. So I mean, Andrew started a long time ago, actually, in some of his prior academic and consulting work before he and I formed the company, assessing dozens and dozens of sites, potential sites around the state. And obviously, as you can imagine, there are many criteria that are important. You want it to be close to existing roads and transmission, but not too close to people or roads. You want it to have excellent wind resource, so that your power is cheap. No one wants electricity costs to go up. So all of that kind of funneled down to about a dozen sites that are the most interesting, between Fairbanks, Anchorage, Kenai, and where the population centers are. And that's where we decided to focus, because that's where over 85% of the rail belt, Fairbanks and Anchorage, get their power from non-renewable CO2 emitting sources. And so that was our focus. Then you go through a land leasing process, which is a state adjudicated process that is, bureaucratic in the best sense of the word. It follows a clear and transparent, set of actions by statute that involve adjudications and reaching out to interested parties, state organizations, federal organizations, Fish and Wildlife Service. And that's actually been pretty terrific, because with the state adjudicating that process, we have an avenue that opens up, comments and feedback from all sorts of organizations, in addition to sessions we do like this. In parallel, of course, assessing the wind. And this means putting up projects on top of little towers on top of the existing site, to measure the wind speed for a number of years, to gather the data set that's going to be useful for engineers and the banks that invest in the project, to assess it and say, yeah, this is good wind. It's not too windy and it's not too slow. There's a tremendous amount of engineering that goes into projects like this, just because the optimization that's possible, moving a turbine slightly can minimize the amount of road that needs to be built. And so there's a tremendous amount of iteration that goes into engineering. And then by far the biggest thing is environmental studies and permitting. For every species that exists, for every class of concern that exists, there's a process, either at a federal level, a state level, or for us, from a culture perspective, at a moral level, that we follow to ensure that these projects have the least impact possible. And that's something we're, I'd say, 30% of the way through, or 25% of the way. And part of how we picked these sites was assessing that there were no red flags. There are no endangered species on the sites. Now, we're obviously quite well aware that by Beluga, there is an endangered species that we need to take care of. When we move that turbine components over to Beluga, how can we minimize acoustics? How can we manage, for that? But we really were able to find, by evaluating all these different sites, opportunities that minimized kind of the don't do this. And that doesn't mean we know everything. So we're certainly open to hearing other concerns related to this, and continue to partner with Alaska Division of Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife Service, and then of course, every environmental and tribal entity that we can speak to and listen to, you know. Interconnection and integration, this is super important. This is how does the project connect to the grid, and how does the existing set of assets, which could include gas, coal, hydro, how do they enable new wind to partner effectively with these existing assets so that you don't have interruptions in power. Power purchase agreements, this is actually inking the contract between the wind farm as a business entity and Chugach Electric or MEA or Golden Valley. And that's really important because, you know, rural electric co-ops are democratic organizations that, you know, run in a way that requires them to serve their members and put their members' interests in front of everything else. And that's why I'm so glad June spoke to, you know, please participate in your rural electric co-op, because it's not a big company from out of state. This is your neighbors and possibly you, who either could work for the utility or be on the board and certainly can influence a vote. And it's our responsibility as a power project to serve that utility with the lowest possible cost, the highest reliability, and of course, you know, the least impact, so that, you know, members are happy. Financing and construction, this is where once all these pieces are together, we go to the large investment banks of the world, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, you know, large banks that want to put capital into projects because it's a safe place to put money. It's a project that's going to run for 30 to 40 years with a fixed low rate of electricity pricing. And compared to, say, oil and gas or other industries, which have their own strengths and weaknesses, this is your bonds. If you think about you try to save for retirement, you've got stocks and bonds. This is a bond, and it is a bond for the community too. And in that sense, we're looking for opportunities for the community to participate in investing in these projects. And then construction. And after that, there's a period of sort of post evaluation to make sure everything went according to plan. And then 30 to 40 years of operations and maintenance, which is pretty minimal. That's changing oil, that's replacing parts periodically. And at the very end, decommissioning or possibly repowering. These days, wind turbine blades are recycled after the life of the wind turbine blade is over and built into new blades. The steel tower itself has the capacity, it's already there, it has the capacity for perhaps a new machine to be put on top to continue to generate power for many more decades. So anyway, I hope that wasn't too long-winded for folks, but gosh, you know, this is years and years of work, and it's a pretty important process. So let me stop there. I did see some Q&A. Maybe I'll just respond to some real quick. One person asked, is the lease going to restrict public land access? No, it's very important to us that this remain land that's accessible. From a safety perspective, during the winter time, you definitely don't want to hang out right underneath the wind turbine because snow and ice falls off of it. And that's something that there will be signage and, you know, proper precautions, just like every other wind farm in the world. But from an access perspective, it's important to us that people be able to access it. Alaska has 75% of the breeding population of bald eagles in the US. How will deaths be mitigated? This is incredibly important to us. So recently, so first of all, on eagles, I'd speak to Fire Island Wind. Fire Island is a good place to go and to see the real livelihood of eagles on that site. On Eva Creek, as required by statute, there was a post-construction bird mortality study, and this indicated that the wind farm did not have a significant impact on birds. That doesn't mean we're not going to study it as well, of course, but there is I'd say a positive track record in Alaska for bird mortality. We can speak a lot more about that. Great. Andrew, do you want to take it to the next one?
Sure, yeah. So let's focus in on and answer some of the details about the project down on Little Mount Susitna. Little Mount Susitna is a broad plateau to the west of Mount Susitna that you see in the background there, the more recognizable profile or sleeping lady that you can see from Anchorage, for example. And this is a broad and lower plateau that is further to the west of that. It's known as Henkadishla, which in the language of the northern Cook Inlet, Upper Cook Inlet indigenous peoples means little upland one, and it's a fitting name, I think, because it's a broad uplands area devoid of trees. It's dominated by this alpine vegetation, low vegetation, and it happens to be very windy up there, and supports a steady supply of wind energy that could be potentially tapped in order to provide for Alaska's energy needs. And so just a little bit of information about the numbers, and on the right here you see an initial map with some of the alternative road access road alternatives that we are considering to access the main lease area up on top of the hill. It is about 37 miles west-northwest of Anchorage, and so it's pretty much beyond the range of visibility for anything directly from Anchorage, for example. You may be able to see a couple of the blinking lights in the same way that you see them on the oil and gas platforms that are currently in the inlet now. It has the capacity for anywhere from 120 to 278 megawatts of wind power capacity. And so this would be a large project that could generate anywhere from maybe 5 to 10 times as much power as the existing wind farms in Alaska at Eva Creek, for example, and Fire Island. It would have anywhere from 24 to 80 turbines spaced out on, as shown here in this preliminary layout for the upper plateau for a 204 megawatt project size. And it would be connected by these access roads that come up from the existing oil and gas roads in the Susitna Flats area, or the Beluga Flats area. This is the Beluga River coming down here on the western side. This is the Theodore River channel, and then this is the Lewis River that comes down, all of which end up in Cook Inlet off to the side here. So the turbines would be delivered to a barge landing off of Cook Inlet near the existing power plant down in Beluga, and then transported along existing roads. And what we're trying to evaluate now is, which of these or variations thereof, alternatives, makes the most sense from the overall project in terms of minimizing impacts to the environment, minimizing wetlands fill, for example, the total amount of road needed, and the overall costs of the project, so that the project can return those price benefits to the customers. And I did see that one of the attendees pointed out that we've applied for a 19,000 acre lease, and I wanted to make clear that that's essentially the area in the blue here, and that is what we expect to happen is that 19,000 acres will be condensed down to the actual constructed infrastructure, which includes the surface of the roads and the a maintenance building and substation up on top of the hill, and the individual wind turbine pads and the turbine towers that are associated with them. So it's a really generally a small actual footprint, and this would be following the model of leasing structure that currently is happening for is in place at the Eva Creek wind farm, which is also on land managed by the state of Alaska. And so this would be 610 acres would be for the largest project size. It would be smaller than that for if we end up doing something like 120 or 200 megawatts. And then anywhere from 33 to 38 total miles of new access roads. A lot of that is linking the individual turbines up at the top of the hill so that we can deliver and install the turbines on in the optimal arrangement up at the top of the hill where the wind resource is best. And then, some of that is for the actual road surface, which will probably be incorporated into an actual easement as opposed to a formal lease. And then similarly, there will need to be a new transmission line spur that would be built from the existing 3-line transmission system that goes along the northern rim of Cook Inlet and then crosses over the Susitna River and then eventually goes into Matanuska's territory and then down under Cook Inlet into Anchorage, so that we could the power could be served into the major load centers there. That would be approximately 11 miles of transmission line that would probably be built in the winter time by with minimal impact on the land. There wouldn't have to be any major roads built up along those.
Andrew, there was a question, a great question around river crossings. So how many salmon spawning rivers would this cross? So there's, as you can see here, there are a number of alternative access roads that we're evaluating right now. And it's always a trade-off between a little more wetlands or a river crossing. So we are still balancing all of those points. As you can see, some of the central access roads here do not cross either the Theodore or the Lewis with a new bridge. They only utilize existing infrastructure versus approaches that are shown here and others we're even still investigating that would cross either the Theodore or the Lewis. And both of those are, rivers that are used by spawning and rearing salmon. And we have a lot of data on that's been shared with us by the state, as well as several environmental organizations. So coho salmon are likely the most common species in both of those rivers. And I just want to go back because I didn't fully answer the eagle question from Eva Creek, not Eagle Creek. We wouldn't build a wind farm at a place called Eagle Creek. So, baselining and benchmarking is super important. And this is a confidential study, but I'm happy to share information offline from it. This is the post-construction study for the Eva Creek Wind Project, which was generously shared with us by the utilities. And the last sentence of the 30-page document says, this study was designed to detect eagles and other large birds. Our high searcher efficiency and high sample size of searches provides reasonable evidence that very low numbers of birds, especially large birds, collided with turbines. This is consistent with the eagle point count prediction of low or possibly no eagle fatalities at the project. And so what's going to happen is we're not just going to do this. We also follow the same process of doing what's called eagle point counts, which is looking for any roosting locations and the evidence of raptors and course, many other species of concern on the site for 1 to 2 years to gather all of the data that's required to be, as they say here, and this was performed by one of the top environmental firms in the state, to have a large enough sample size so we actually know. And I'd only add that from a mitigation perspective, because this is very important to us, there are many other things out there that cause species impacts. So for us, it's about adding that up and assessing, are there things we can do elsewhere to mitigate, because mitigation is used in the very question that one person asked, is an important tool as well, if necessary.
And in particular, I would add that climate change is one of the major threats to bird populations in general. And so we think that by addressing that and reducing emissions, that's one of the ways to mitigate some of the risks to our ecosystems.
Yeah. There was another great question, which just in the spirit of dialogue, I'll answer. Once windmills are erected, there's minimal employment, which doesn't help the economy. This is an important point. Windmills and wind farms do not require much maintenance. That's one of the reasons they're such a cheap form of electricity. That cheap electricity is very important to the future of the state and to the future of industry and businesses and the ability for residents to live in the state. And a lot of the pressure that the utilities are under, which we see, just by reading the newspaper and paying attention, is how can we lower energy costs in Alaska to make it more economic for other businesses to open up. So this is a really important point for us, that this is about creating a lower cost of electricity for the long term in order to drive job growth. And that's there's definitely jobs for the turbines themselves, and we're concerned about, are there enough engineers and technicians to actually take care of the wind farm, because there are jobs there. But it's a lever that has a much bigger impact. So. And Michael, sorry, this is great. Please keep these questions coming. They're all awesome. And Ptarmigan, having roamed on the site, not for 29 years, so your data set will be better. But ptarmigan was definitely mentioned extensively in the data sets that we've been given by Alaska Division of Fish and Game. So it's absolutely on the site. I will say that there are other sites we considered that had more ptarmigan that are not prioritized. So I have, anyway. So yeah, that one's on the list to be studied. I'm not sure how high ptarmigan can fly though, but I'll leave that to the wildlife biologists.
Great. And so we put together some visualizations of what this might look like here. And here's the broad plateau looking kind of up above, and this is the Lewis River drainage coming down in here, and with Mount Susitna further to the right. Most of the project would be on the broader southern portion of the plateau, and then it would follow up the generally higher points towards the summit or the high point of Little Mount Susitna, which is somewhere around here. And so this is generally looking to the north, and there's Denali and Foraker in the background as well, and the Susitna River Valley in the background there. And I think this is the Yetna moving across there. The Susitna, West Susitna access road that some of you may be familiar with is the proposed project mining road that would come out somewhere along these hills and then go into the proposed mining district into the Alaska Range out here. We wouldn't link up to that. most economic and environmentally friendly way to link up to transportation and electrical infrastructure is from the routes that we showed to the south. I did get contacted by Brian and Laura before the call, and when they found out that we're giving a little talk here, and I think there's somebody else I saw that is calling in from Mike from the same area out by Trail Lake, and so I quickly put
we finally lost Andrew.
together.
Right?
Am I still there? Can you hear me?
We lost you for 5 or 6 seconds.
Okay. So we can, yeah, so you can see here, maybe not. There's only a few pixels in the image, but some of the turbines would be visible from the Trail Lake area on, the southern, primarily the near the summit and further to the south of that. I'd say the majority of the potential turbine sites are on the other side of the subtle ridge and rounded ridge like plateau feature here. So most would not be visible from there, but there would definitely be visibility of the project from this location. And so this is something that, I'm glad our neighbors, potential neighbors from Trail Lake are on the call, and we look forward to, conversing with you and learning more about your concerns and considerations for a project like this. And here's Mount Susitna to the west.
And hey, Andrew, just because you broke up for a second, I want to make sure it's clear to anyone who may have missed it. The visualization you have here shows the turbines at scale. In obviously this is a picture, right? But this is what it would look like. Is that the point?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, this is what it would look like from the Trail Lake direction here. Yep.
Great. I know we're running up on time. Let me try to nail the 3 questions really fast because they're great, and please keep them coming. If clean energy permitting reform gets passed, how would that help this project? The permitting reform that Joe Manchin and Senator Murkowski and others are working on essentially says that the government can't take forever to evaluate the project. It fundamentally puts a time limit on that, and that doesn't get us out of doing any permitting or environmental studies, which we would do, as I hope you know by now. It simply says that the process needs to happen quickly enough to address our concerns as a nation about energy security or environment or climate. The question about I turn my gas on, I have heat. With electric, we get a windstorm and a tree falls across power line, I have no heat. I know you guys probably don't have an answer to this, but is the power company going to try to minimize this? This is our favorite topic. This is our probably most important company expertise, if I can say that. And that is in close partnership with the utilities, there is no interruption in power. And this is a whole, I'm sorry, I'm an engineer, so I'll get really nerdy about this one, but this is a whole fascinating topic about how when the wind speed goes away, how other resources fill it in. And some of those resources are existing gas. Some of those resources are existing hydro. Some of them will be new energy storage, and how other tools like forecasting, where you can tell within, in the next 5 minutes, the wind is going to start to go down. So turn up another asset. So we are not a wind power company. We're an energy company. And we kind of, as Andrew kicked off, we love all the technologies that are looking for the right fit of those technologies. So a really important one, and one that, if you buy me a beer, I could talk about that one for about, 5 hours, but I'll definitely talk about that one. And we're still learning with Chugach and the other utilities. What is the expected timeline and next steps from Kensley? Hi, Kensley. So environmental studies and permitting will take 2 years. And that's about twice as long as in the lower 48. But this is an important site and an important project, and so we're trying to do it right, and take the right amount of time. And then construction would take about 2 years, so 2025 and 2026. Andrew, please continue. Just try to, yeah.
Yeah, there was Michael asked another question about the Donnellan
Yeah.
the proposed Donnellan gas line. And that would go along the eastern side of the Little Mount Susitna Plateau and then out across the Alaska Range. So yeah, there would be potential overlap in infrastructure there. If possible, we're going to try to minimize the overall, if there's synergies there in terms of like a constructed road or easements and shared infrastructure that can be utilized, we're looking for opportunities to do that. And we don't anticipate that there will be any conflict between those potential roles. And who knows, maybe Donald and Gold will want to switch over to renewable power and buy some wind power from the site. So maybe we can supply them with power. I don't know. So yeah, we can quickly wrap up. We are doing. Matt spoke to the environmental studies that we're kicking off, and this covers everything from wetlands, wildlife in the project area, looking at migratory birds and understanding the times of year and the potential chances for impacts on those migrating birds, any threatened and endangered species. The only one that exists in the project area is the beluga whale that is a resident that is present in Cook Inlet first parts of the year. And then we also will be doing fish studies and looking at the fish populations and making sure that any installed road accessing the plateau minimizes impacts through proper road design and construction practices that minimize the impact on the actual habitat and stream bed there. And then also cultural resources, identifying, what the site has been used for in the past by the indigenous peoples that have long lived on these lands, and making sure that we're not disturbing any important cultural sites, and that we have the support of the indigenous peoples who have really managed these lands for time, since time immemorial, and also use them for subsistence activities. So we need to better understand and discuss this with the local villages, and we're in the process of doing that now, and make sure we understand any concerns and avoid any unnecessary or undue impacts on their ability to harvest subsistence resources from the area. And then marine mammals, as Matt said, the primary concern is as we bring these wind turbine components up onto the beach and transport them up to the site, that we're not having any impact on the beluga whales that are there, or any other marine mammals for that matter. Since this is the Susitna River Coalition, I kind of wanted to provide just like a simple comparison of just how this relates to other potential energy projects, and one of them is the Susitna-Wantana Dam. And in terms of the overall developed footprint, a wind project would have much smaller overall development impact on the land. So as I mentioned, it's going to be something around 600 acres for a project at the maximum project size, whereas the Susitna-Wantana Dam would inundate over 23,000 acres. And in doing so, it could provide 50% of Railbelt energy demand at a cost of anywhere between $5 to $8 billion in, like, pre-inflationary numbers. And as opposed to the Little Mount Susitna project, if scaled to the maximum, feasible project size, it could provide about 19% of the Railbelt's energy demand, and cost, probably a tenth of the overall cost of that large hydropower facility. And so this kind of is a little bit illustrative of why we are focusing our attention on wind as a resource that can provide the next the next and more sustainable option for the rail belt, really, and displace some of the gas that we're currently burning in for power generation, and eventually also heating our homes. So if we begin to electrify our heating systems with heat pumps, like the one I have here in our bedroom and / office, we can start getting our heat from electricity and renewable power as well. So I think that's about all we had. And so, yeah, I just wanted to thank you all again and open it up to any additional questions.
Michael points out you need to talk with the locals scattered throughout the area. That appears to not have happened so far. That's right. I mean, this is probably one of our first local oriented, because so much of our dialogue so far has been with all the other levels of interest and questions, especially state agencies and environmental. But Michael, if you're willing to help us, and if you're a local, as I now understand, I'd love for us to meet with you. We're a small company. You're looking at most of the company right now. We're not state funded. We're not federally funded. We do this out of our own interest in making an impact. And so you're talking to the company right now, and we'd love to talk more. And frankly, we'd love to have your help. And we're so grateful that June and Margaret and Melissa and SRC, which we really see as one gateway to getting to know the local community, offered us this chance tonight. So yeah, 100%. And whether by snow machine or cross-country ski or otherwise, getting out to you and any of your neighbors, I'd really appreciate that. Say when and where. Excellent. February and tell me, are we meeting on cross-country skis or what? But yeah, we'll get your contact info from Margaret and follow up offline. Mike, the wind studies are almost done. Gosh, we have a bunch of studies that are going on right now. I wish I could say they were almost done, but no, there's a lot of work left to be done, and it's promising so far. What Andrew shows here, this meteorological tower that gathers the wind data, that's gathered very promising data that shows this could be a low cost and reliable source of power, but there's more to be done to study that data. But the goal, and what Chugach Electric has asked us for, and on behalf of their members, and MEA has an interest as well, is getting that power online by 2026. So yes, construction could take place in 2025 in order to meet their interest and demand. Other questions? Well, this is really wonderful, and I'll let Andrew answer some.
I don't see any more questions. Kensley says, thank you all for everything you're doing and a very informative presentation. Yeah, I want to thank you guys for coming and joining us tonight. That was really informative, and thank you so much for answering all those questions. And do you guys have an email where people can reach you in case they have more questions? If so, could
You
you
can
guys
reach it,
put it
you
in
can reach
chat?
out to us on our website and submit a comment or your email address, and I can get in touch with you there. It's just alaskarenewables.com.
Great. We'll make sure to put that in the chat here and send it out to folks that were registered for the webinar as well. So you have another avenue to get in touch. And if Mike, I'll make sure to pass along your email to Matt and Andrew. And yeah, I guess the only other thing that we'd like to bring up is how can folks get involved in this? Is there any way that, yeah, the public and our community, how can we support this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think well, you're doing it right now. So by participating in these meetings, because we really need to hear from the community and learn more about, all the considerations that surround a project like this. And so thank you. That's the most important thing. I think aside from that, as June mentioned at the outset, I think getting involved with the utilities and letting them know your interest in real viable renewable energy solutions that are done in a sensible way and with minimal impacts on the environment are things that we're looking for, and in terms of solving the energy problems and challenges that we have. And so yeah, just your advocacy there can go a long ways as well. I don't know, Matt, can you think of anything else?
Well, gosh, yeah. If somebody wants to help us, carry measuring equipment up to the site next time, it's a long cross-country ski from Beluga to get up there. No, in all seriousness, I would say I would echo what Andrew said. And for those of you who watch this later on YouTube or Facebook, it'll still be true then. Please talk to us and talk to your neighbors about this and your friends and the community, because these kinds of projects, they don't happen if the community doesn't want it, and they only happen if the community does want it. And that's really important, because a lot of people, I think, who I don't read the newspaper that much. I'm too busy, and so I might not know about all the things going on, and word of mouth and asking questions and hearing the dialogue from your friends and neighbors, and then bringing that back to us to answer. There's no question that we should not answer, and no consideration that we don't want to take. But we can only be in so many places at once, and so people who show up to these kinds of sessions tonight and watch this later are really part of that community, and we appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And it's so cool to hear. I mean, again, we formed in response to Susitna Wind and are really excited about smaller renewable projects that are, put redundancy onto the grid and support a vibrant future. So thank you so much. This is pretty exciting to hear about. So again, thank you for being here, and I'll pass it back to June to wrap up.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here again, and everyone for joining in virtually. I just want to say that hopefully we'll see you guys in the next speaker series coming up in February. And we also have an upcoming meeting with Rachel Christensen from the Alaska Center, the Solarized Talkeetna program. It's our second meeting, but anyone is welcome if they missed the first one, and I will put the link to our Facebook event page in the chat for anyone who wants to come join. It is going to be next Thursday on the 26th, and it will be virtual. Yeah, thanks guys.
Great. Well,
Great.
have a
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, it's always so funny over the Zoom. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it again. And yeah, if anybody has any more comments, send them our way. We'll put you in touch with Andrew and Matt if you can't find their emails otherwise. Thanks so much for being here, and have a great night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you soon, I hope.